"What is going on in here?" asked Eugenia. "There's a monster outside," said Baby. She pointed at the window. "That is not a monster," said Eugenia. "That is the pig from next door." "Mercy?" said Baby. Eugenia shook her fist. "In my opinion," said Eugenia, "pigs belong on farms." "Yes, sister," said Baby. Eugenia tapped a knuckle against the window. "Get out of my yard," she shouted at Mercy. "Oh, sister," said Baby, "don't yell at her. You'll hurt her feelings." "She doesn't have feelings," shouted Eugenia. "She's a pig." "Oh," said Baby. I'm sure you're wrong, dear." "I am not wrong," Eugenia shouted. "I'm never wrong. I know a pig when I see one." Eugenia scowled. She pressed her nose against the window pane. Mercy stared at Eugenia. Eugenia stared at Mercy. "Pig!" shouted Eugenia. She turned and ran out of Baby's room. "Oh dear," said Baby Lincoln. "Oh my!" Eugenia ran toward Mercy. Mercy's heart beat faster. There was going to be a chase. Mercy loved a chase. She let Eugenia get very close to her. "Oink!" said Mercy, dashing away. "Get out of my yard!" shouted Eugenia. "Oink, oink!" said Mercy. She ran in circles. She kicked up her heels. "No pigs allowed!" Eugenia shouted. "Oh, sister," said Baby, "please be careful." A siren wailed. A fire truck pulled into the Lincoln sisters' driveway. Ned and Lorenzo got out of the truck. "Do you think that's the emergency?" Ned asked. "Could it be," said Lorenzo. Ned and Lorenzo sighed. "You never know with this a job," said Lorenzo. "You're right," said Ned. "You never know." "Ma'am," said Lorenzo to Baby, "did you call the fire department?" "Oh dear," said Baby, "I did not. But Eugenia may have called." "Who is Eugenia?" asked Ned. "My sister," said Baby. "Is that her?" asked Lorenzo. "The one chasing the pig?" "Yes," said Baby. "That's her." Baby and Ned and Lorenzo watched Eugenia chasing Mercy through the yard. Lorenzo cleared his throat. "What was the emergency exactly?" asked Ned. I thought I saw a monster at my bedroom window," said Baby. "But it was not a monster. It was Mercy." "Mercy?" said Lorenzo. "The pig," said Baby. "The pig who lives next door." "I see," said Ned. Eugenia does not care for Mercy," said Baby. "In her opinion, pigs belong on farms." "There's something to be said for that opinion," said Lorenzo. Ned nodded. "Help!" shouted a faraway voice. "Help! Help! Help us!" "Did you hear that?" asked Ned. "Somebody is in trouble," said Lorenzo. "Let's go." Ned and Lorenzo ran toward the call for help. They went into the Watsons' house. "Help!" Ned and Lorenzo looked up. They saw a bed hanging out of the ceiling. They saw Mr. and Mrs. Watson holding on to the bed for dear life. "We are saved!" cried Mrs. Watson. "Of course we are saved," said Mr. Watson. "Mercy has alerted the fire department." "She is amazing," said Mrs. Watson. "She is unbelievable." "She is a porcine wonder," said Mr. Watson. Ned and Lorenzo ran upstairs. They picked up Mr. and Mrs. Watson. The Watsons' bed sighed loudly and crashed all the way through the floor. Boom! Mr. Watson looked at the hole where the bed used to be. "I have always believed very firmly in the fire department," said Mr. Watson. "As have I," said Mrs. Watson. "As have I." From outside the Watsons' house came a squeal. "Gotcha!" shouted Eugenia. Ned and Lorenzo and Mr. and Mrs. Watson all went outside. Eugenia was sitting on the ground. Her arms were wrapped around Mercy's neck. Her cheek was resting on Mercy's back. Eugenia was breathing very loudly. "This pig," she said, "was on my property." "We prefer that you did not call her a pig," said Mrs. Watson. "We would prefer that you call her a porcine wonder," said Mr. Watson. "After all, she did save us. She's a hero." "She's a pig," said Eugenia. She started to cry. There, sister," said Baby. She bent over and patted Eugenia on the back. Mercy yawned. She was very tired. "I guess that's it," said Ned. "Yep," said Lorenzo. "Our work here is done." "Wait," said Mrs. Watson. "It's almost time for breakfast." "Oink?" asked Mercy. "That's right, breakfast," said Mrs. Watson. She kissed the top of Mercy's head. She looked up at the firemen. "Do you boys like toast?" In the Watsons' house, around the Watsons' kitchen table, sat Eugenia Lincoln and Baby Lincoln and Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson and Ned and Lorenzo and Mercy, of course. She was at the head of the table in the seat of honor, and in front of her on her favorite blue plate was a very tall stack of hot, buttered toast. "A toast to Mercy," said Mr. Watson, holding up his glass of orange juice. "A toast to our darling, our dear," said Mrs. Watson. "A toast to Mercy," said Baby. "In my opinion," said Eugenia, "pigs should not be toasted. In my opinion, pigs do not belong at the kitchen table." "To our hero," said Mr. Watson. "Where would we be without Mercy?" "Yes," said Mrs. Watson. "Who would have saved us?" "I can't imagine," said Ned. "Me neither," said Lorenzo. They all clinked glasses. Mercy had another piece of toast. Outside the Watsons' house, the sun was rising. First, the sun was red, and then it was orange. It rose higher and higher. Inside the Watsons' house, Mercy was lying on the couch. She was getting ready to take a nap. "Bright, bright is the morning sun," sang Mr. and Mrs. Watson together. "But brighter still is our porcine wonder." Mercy smiled. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before Mr. and Mrs. Watson even finished the song. The end.